So I do have folks asking about what I feed my goats and why I feed them grain and stuff like that. And here's the deal. Meat goats, especially out on good pasture, browse kind of thing, they are gonna be just fine with that and probably not needing a whole lot of grain or any grain. I know some Kiko breeders and some Boer breeders that feed no grain, or they might feed just a very small amount when they're dose kid and while they're nursing. But my dairy goats are in dry lots, so they're in smaller pens. I have no pasture or browse or anything for them at this point in time. So they can't balance their own diets. They're just getting what I bring them. So I'm going to show you how I do things. So this is the grain that I feed. I have tried a couple of other brands in the past, but my girls do not like a completely pelleted feed. And this feed has some pellets, but it also has some grain in it. I'll borrow some of Ezzy's grain here. So you can see the pellets, but you can also see there's some corn and some oats and stuff in there. And they won't eat totally pelleted feed. They want that grain mix in there. It also has a little bit of molasses and, of course, vitamins and minerals and things like that. So, my milkers, I kind of free feed the milkers, but these girls kind of self-regulate. Like when they first kid, they will act like they are starving to death and they will eat a lot. And I will gradually increase the amount of grain they're getting until they actually start leaving a little bit in the pan. Because I want to make sure that they have enough protein and calories to make lots of milk for me and their kids. Because usually they're nursing kids and milking. And then the other thing I feed are these fortified horse pellets. This is an alfalfa-based pellet with extra copper and other minerals and vitamins and things added to it. They also get free choice alfalfa hay, the best that I can get a hold of. The reason that I feed pellets, the reason that I feed the hay pellets is not so much that they really need them or anything, but for a couple of reasons. One, at one point, I did own a goat that had a jaw. Her bottom jaw was too long, and she was having a really hard time with kind of a rough batch of hay that I had gotten. She just couldn't get enough of the big, long stems and stuff to keep her condition up. And that is genetic, and I don't have any of those, that goat or anything related to her anymore because of that. But the next thing that happened was I didn't realize it was a holiday weekend, and at that time I was hauling 1 or 2 bales of hay at a time in the back of my van, and I didn't realize that it was a holiday weekend, and my feed dealer had closed up early on Friday and was gone all weekend, including Monday. And I was almost totally out of hay. And nobody else in town had any hay. Like, everybody was out of hay. And so I ended up buying one of those compressed bales of hay in the bag. But I also bought some of the hay pellets, and that got us by. So I've continued to feed some hay pellets to all the goats every day. because if something happens to my hay dealer or his supply, for instance, we had a giant wildfire a couple of years ago, and there are 4 main roads in and out of town, and 3 of those were closed for weeks. They were closed because of the wildfires. So if something was to happen to my supplier, because our hay is grown, 60 to 100 miles away from us, then I could feed a little bit less hay and more pellets. And that way I'm not upsetting their rumens or anything, because they're used to eating the pellets. So that's my thinking there anyway. And then, like, poor Bashful broke a couple of teeth last year on a T-post. And I've noticed his condition's been down a little bit this winter. I think partly it's mineral issues, but I think also it might be those broken teeth are not helping him get everything he needs out of the hay. So I actually feed him a little bit more hay pellets than I do the other goats, because they are easier for him to get up and eat. Now, I don't necessarily feed exactly the same way every day of the year. If the hay is not super good quality, maybe it's summer and maybe it's gotten a little bleached out, or maybe the stems are really big and there's not a lot of leaf in it, or something like that, where I know it's not as nutritious as it could be, I'll feed a little bit more hay pellet, and so that I know that the girls are getting all their nutrition and they still have the regular hay for their fiber. Grain. In the past, I haven't really grained my kids, and I noticed that some kids did not grow out as well as I thought they should have. So this year, with Esmeralda's triplets, as they started to wean themselves and they were starting to eat some of Mom's grain and her hay, I did start feeding them grain. And by the time they were weaning themselves at about 5.5 to 6 months, I was feeding them about a pound of grain a day. And they're going to be a year old in April. This is the end of January. So their growth has really slowed down quite a bit now. And because they aren't really growing as fast, they're almost as big as they're going to get. They'll continue to grow and fill out over the next year, but they're pretty close. And I've noticed that they're getting a little bit chubby. So I have been cutting their grain back. And so now they're just getting about 1/4 pound a day, just more as a little treat than anything. Bambi and Pinto Bean. So when I bred Bambi back in October, she was milking once a day at about 6 pints a day. And so she was eating about 2 pounds of grain. And then about 3 weeks after I bred her, she was acting starving and wanted more. So we gave her a little more. So she was up to about 2.5 pounds of grain a day. And I knew it was because she was pregnant, that she needed that extra feed. And also she has a record of consistently having triplets and sometimes quads. So I knew she needed more nutrition. Miss Pinto Bean was a little bit too plump, really, when I bred her. And so she had been getting about 1/2 pound of grain a day. And actually cut her back a little bit. And I am just now about 6 weeks from kidding, and she is looking pretty good. And so we'll be gradually increasing her grain until she's up to about a pound or a little more at kidding time. So just to make sure she's got enough protein and calories when she comes into milk. Bambi, when I dried her up, I cut her back to just an even 2 pounds. I did not lower her amount lower than that, because she does have multiple kids, and I do not want her to, be nutritionally starving or anything. What? Oh, now y'all gonna fool around with your space? She's gonna go eat hay pellets now. So my feeding routine and amounts and things vary, just depending on conditions. For instance, if the hay is really bad, we'll feed more hay pellets, maybe a little bit more grain. And I just really watch the condition of the girls, and like if they're putting on a little too much weight, or if they're losing weight or anything like that, and vary things as I need to. So feeding your goats really is very dependent on so many different things. Where you live, what you have access to, do you have pasture or browse for them? What are they used to eating? What were they raised on? Because sometimes they get real picky, and if it's something new, they may not eat it. So it just really depends. Sometimes you just gotta kind of try things out and see what works, and just observe your animals. Those that are really starving, acting like they're starving. I mean, everybody says, oh, goats, live on their stomachs, and they do. But if they're not getting enough nutrition or minerals or something, then yeah, and something comes along that has in it what they need, they are going to gorge on it. They're just going to be scarfing it up like crazy. So for instance, if there's a plant or something, or grain or whatever that has, say, they're short of zinc or copper or selenium or whatever, they're just going to be chowing down on it because it's something that they really need. I try to keep things even. I try not to make abrupt changes in feed, because I don't want to upset their rumens and make them bloat, because that can be life-threatening to a ruminant. Now in the spring and summer, when I have extra leafy greens, carrot tops, tree branches, rose prunings, things like that from the gardens, I do give them some of those things. And I'm hoping that over the next year or two that I will be able to fence off some of my brushy hillside, where I can turn them out to eat whatever they want up there, and kind of balance their diets on their own. I think the mineral buffet has been really helpful with some of this. Anyway, that's just kind of how I have been doing things. It's just been kind of a long learning curve over the last, 5 years that I've had dairy goats this time around. 40 years ago, when I had dairy goats the first time, I lived in a completely different environment. I lived in East Texas, lots of rain. My girls were still in small pen, but I had hundreds of acres of pine trees behind me, and I had to, my light's coming on. And there was a power line right of way right behind my property, and they were going to cut everything growing in there anyway, so I would go out and collect little pine tree saplings and throw them in the goat pen. I had a huge garden, so they got corn stalks and cabbage and broccoli leaves, and they got loads of carrot tops. We had a lot of grass growing. We had a lot of blackberries growing, so they got all of those things. And back then, nobody ever really talked about minerals. I don't even remember now if there was a salt block in their pen. But they all seem to have done really well, and they milked well, and the kids were all good. So I think that having all of those other things helped with their diet. And now, though, I'm more confined to just alfalfa hay and the grain, and so I'm trying to kind of muddle my way through and just do the best I can and feed them as well as I can. I will say, back then, 40 years ago, when I did start feeding tree branches, like going out and getting pine saplings and things like that, the girls would eat all the needles off of them and then strip all the bark off of them. And when they had those, I did notice that their milk production went up a little bit. So they were probably getting some minerals and vitamins and things out of those that they weren't getting out of their other feeds. So anyway, those are just some things to think about. Wherever you live, I hope you have, if you're new to goats, that you have a mentor that can kind of help you find good feed that works for your herd and that keeps them up in their health and with their nutrition, because everything revolves around the nutrition. Everything, good pregnancy outcomes, good milk production, and good milk quality. Everything revolves around the nutritional base. So, and it's a learning curve. Anyway, y'all have a great day.